212A. You've already made your comments on Bradford, but I want to add a little more and go over a few more details. And so we're looking at page 133. Bradford's talking about arriving in Plymouth, and he's thinking about what they face. And so here's a little part I want to look at. It is recorded in Scripture as a mercy to the apostle and his shipwrecked company that the barbarians showed them no small kindness in refreshing them. But these savage barbarians, when they met with them, as after will appear, were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. And so Bradford is implying that the pilgrims are having a harder time than the apostle and his shipwrecked company. These natives they're dealing with are more violent. And so he's not really mentioning that they ended up stealing some corn from some natives at this point either. And then a little farther down, Bradford provides more on this subject. Besides, what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness, full of wild beasts and wild men? And what multitudes there might be of them they knew not. Neither could they, as it were, go up to the top of Pisgah to view from this wilderness a more goodly country to feed their hopes. For which way soever they turn their eyes, save upward to the heavens, they could have little solace or content in respect of any outward objects. And right here, Bradford is emphasizing that the pilgrims have it rougher than Moses and his followers. They don't get to see a promised land, a land of milk and honey. He also is comparing natives to beasts with a form of alliteration, and it's pretty harsh. But it also has this poetic quality. Bradford is a really strong writer. Okay, I'm going to move on to a few more parts of the text. Now, I would like to look at the deal that was cut between Bradford, the pilgrims, and Massasoit. So page 141, we see some of the points of the arrangement. The first one is that neither he nor any of his should injure or do hurt to any of their people. And so this sounds a little one-sided because he says neither he, Massasoit, or any of Massasoit's people should hurt any of their people, meaning the pilgrims. There's no comment about them not hurting Massasoit or Massasoit's people. Here's another one. That if any of his did any hurt to any of theirs, he should send the offender that they might punish him. So if Massasoit or one of his followers hurts a pilgrim, then Massasoit is supposed to send that offender to the pilgrims. There's no mention of the reverse happening. And then this last one is interesting as well, number 6. That when their men came to them, that is Massasoit's men, visited the pilgrims, they should leave their bows and arrows behind them. And so the pilgrims are not mentioning that when they go visit Massasoit, they will leave their guns behind. So there seems to be an imbalance in this agreement that's reached. And Bradford doesn't even really seem aware of it. I'm going to move forward to other parts of the text now. 45. And he's pointing out that Morton has sent out a call to servants, indentured servants, that he would help them lead better lives. He would take care of them. They could rebel against their masters, and so he is a bit of a rebel. Bradford considers him to be creating disorder in the area, and so he says right here, and Morton became lord of misrule and maintained, as it were, a school of atheism. And so this emphasizes the revelry that Morton is promoting. Morton was not really an atheist, but from Bradford's perspective, his disorderly conduct is a sign of atheism. Also, Morton is an Anglican, and so Bradford is not sympathetic toward that, and so he thinks that that's just a terrible religious thing. And so there's a little description of him setting up a maypole with his company. It's right here. They also set up a maypole, drinking and dancing about it many days together, inviting the Indian women for their consorts, dancing and frisking together, like so many fairies or furies, rather and worse practices. And so Bradford doesn't like that Morton is trying to hook up with native women and that he's with other guys hanging out. And so he considers him to be a pagan. And so this is a really terrible thing for Bradford. But in England, this sort of activity with a maypole and sort of dancing and partying on May Day would be fairly accepted. And this is one reason the Pilgrims didn't really like England. They thought it was inconsistent. They thought it was anti-Christian. And so this is why he gets so freaked out here. Bradford's language gets really excessive here when he's describing this, too. You can tell he's getting very hot under the collar. And then he even says he wants to leave this subject because it's not really worth his time. And so he has complete disdain for Morton. I'm going to move on to another part of the text. I'm looking at page 155. Many of you wrote about the horrible truth that Bradford includes in his history. Thomas Granger. Quite an infamous young man. And so he was discovered buggering a bunch of different animals. And here's a list. A mare, a cow, 2 goats, 5 sheep, 2 calves, and a turkey. And so it's all really disturbing. And most people feel like this is absolutely crazy. These animals, it's enough. But then also to throw in a bird, a turkey, seems really over the top. And I wanted to comment on how he confirms all this too. And so it's a little bit below, around here. Bradford writes, and whereas some of the sheep could not so well be known by his description of them, others with them were brought before him, and he declared which were they and which were not. And so it's interesting that Bradford and company parade the animals in front of him, and he names them. And I said in some people's posts when you brought this up that it seems to echo the part of Genesis where God brings animals before Adam, and Adam names them. It even has that same kind of language. And so it's really bizarre the way Bradford wrote this. And Bradford, of course, being so well versed in the Bible, would have been aware of that too, but it just slipped in. And many of you commented on how this was some aspect of terrible English practices coming over, and Bradford definitely sees it this way. He sees it as declension in the colony, some sort of decline, a falling off from the original religious fervency of the first generation. And this becomes a theme in a lot of Puritan literature. This idea that after the first generation of deeply religious people, the children start pulling away. And it's incredibly troubling. And it often evokes a kind of elegiac tone throughout a lot of Puritan writing. And so it's a big part of it. Something else I want to note here is in this paragraph. Upon the examination of this person and also of former that had made some sodomitical attempts upon another, it being demanded of them how they came first to the knowledge and practice of such wickedness, the one confessed he had long used it in old England. And this youth last spoken said he was taught it by another that had heard of such things from some in England when he was there, and they kept cattle together, by which it appears how one wicked person may infect many. And so many people wrote posts about this idea of the spread of the infection, the terrible English practices coming over into the colonies, and Bradford wanted to escape it, but there really is no escaping it. The thing that is interesting for me is the people involved here are not really that clear. And so we know Thomas Granger was executed, but seems like there were at least 2 people who were doing this sort of stuff, but we don't hear about the punishment of the other person. And apparently he wasn't executed. Was he reprimanded? Was Thomas Granger made into a big example so that other people who might have been doing this would stop doing it? They would fear for their lives. And so this is one of the questions we have hanging over the text. Okay, I'm going to sign off.